G'day, freedom lovers. How are we today? I tell ya, it's been fun setting this podcast up. I think I've changed it 3 times now, but that's okay. That's how things work, the gods work in mysterious ways. Sorry, Rex. I can't. The intro is designed to be a little bit long to give people a chance to enter the room. Like people are still coming in now. I have contemplated making it longer, and I think Rex may have just inspired me to do so. I don't know. How does everybody else feel about that? Because I'm watching people popping in. Exactly. Got time to grab your beer, get yourself settled, feel the vibes. I wrote that piece of music. I enjoy listening to it. And I love watching my little intro. And every time I sit there and think, I could change it just a little bit. But, it all comes down to time. So originally I had Alex from the People First Party coming on. He tried his best. He must have pumped about an hour and a half of his very busy day into trying to desperately to get the technology to work. But it's just unfortunately unable to do it. So I commend his efforts. I think he's definitely re-earned my vote in at least in the top 2. I'm going to have to toss a coin, on my top 2. It's become one of those things that it's just a bit hard sometimes to make a choice as to which one you're going to choose. When you got too many good options, which truth I don't think we've seen too often in this electoral system. It's good to know that we have options. It's like and good ones, not just the lesser of 2 evils. It's great to see. I'm personally feeling very excited about how this election may turn out. But boy, have we got a bombshell to talk about tonight on that one. So Darren's not with us just yet. He's, one of the people I contacted because I noticed last night a few people said, the William Bay was no longer a part of the Great Australia Party. I'm like, truth, I didn't hear that. What happened there? So thought I'd get in and find out what happened. There seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding about how one does promotions as a politician sort of thing. So it looks like he's no longer with the Great Australia Party. I will have to talk to Mr. Billy Bay to see what's exactly going on. As far as I know, he's still on the electoral roll. I believe he'll be classed as an independent at this particular juncture in time, but that's just a guess. I don't know. We'll see what's going on. Yeah. Basically, if you're in one party, you can't promote another, as far as I understand. So, yeah, bit of a learning curve, because I didn't realize that something like that would cause such a problem, and perhaps he didn't either. I don't know. But look, we've got some good shit for you anyway. Like, so we're talking to Darren, he was like wired. He's like, man, I'm not going to tell you what he said, because he's going to be here to tell you himself. So in the meantime, though, ladies and gentlemen, while we patiently wait for our good friend Mr. Darren Dixon, I thought DD, if he was a superhero, who would he be? Daredevil. Just makes sense. It's got the D and the D thing going. There's that whole lawyery thing going on. Really knows his shit, and he's fighting a good fight for the people. So just as a little epiphany I had earlier. I thought I'd share, but other things to share in the meantime. I was talking yesterday about how many Indigenous people there are versus how many people Albo's imported, and I wonder how they'd feel about that. So I'm going to reach out to the Indigenous community to find out. But what I do have is the numbers, which is what I didn't have yesterday. So I checked it out. There, according to the 2021 census, there's 812,000 people who identified as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. So of that, only 91% of that is actually Aboriginal to this particular landmass. Torres Strait Islander, it was 4.12, and there seems to be a 4.4 integration between the two. So that said, let's just focus on the 812 that are apparently here. There may be more, there may be less, given the fact that this is 2021 census data. But the shocking immigration numbers, Albo brought in 445,600 migrants that flooded into Australia, by the words here from the this particular Daily Mail article. This was 50,600 higher than the 395 level forecast in the 23-24 by the May budget papers. So when you look at that, in 1 year, he's brought in more than half their current population in 1 year. Imagine, being that culture and realizing that you've got this lunatic at the helm that has just imported, more people in his entire term than you have in your own country. Let that sink in while they're worrying about, parades and what's it, welcome to country stuff, that's what it's just shocking. And especially when you go into the next one. So that was 404. Yep. So there's that. And the next article here, this latest ABS data confirms that the 1,000 net new migrants have arrived in Australia each day and every day under Albanese. Australians cannot have confidence in this government when it comes to controlling migration. Pretty disturbing stuff when you look at that, and to it has been over 1 million people. He has, as I surmised yesterday, maybe not accurately with the numbers, but he has imported more people than there are Aboriginals in this country. Let that sink in while they're virtue signaling. Why aren't the Aboriginal people more up in arms about this? This is, or are they? And they're those ones who are just not really getting into it. Yeah, that's why I'm not making any judgments. I don't know exactly what's going on. I'd like to hear from him myself as well, Robin. Totally agree. Let's hear what he's got to say. I don't know the full story. I'm only going on rumors, or at the very least secondhand information. But that's a story we might have a look at later. I'd like to hear from him and see what's going on myself. But that aside, I thought that it was important to clear that detail up. I personally find it absolutely insulting to the Indigenous people, not to mention insulting to all Australians who are now bearing the burden of his insane immigration policies. So that's one reason, if not many, one of many, to get rid of the old elbow. So anyway, so voting in the Senate. So what I wanted to talk about too, Build a Ballot was the page I was using yesterday. And I didn't want people to go, hey, actually start using this build a ballot site. I wasn't, well, I didn't really mention it. What I did do was use it for the research hub, and sort of go into to figure out bits and pieces of around the candidates. That's where I find it's useful. I did actually have a look today to see what happens if you use the build a ballot thing, and have a look at this. This is pretty disturbing. I think if I had a little bit more time, I'd dive in to find out exactly who this Project Planet Inc. is. But by the name itself, it seems to suggest there's a bit of a greeny, if not teal, construct going on here, even in the color scheme. And when you go and have a look at the questions, it seems to say the same thing. Um, how would the federal government help ease the cost of living? So obviously that is the big issue, and at least that's a kind of a central issue. But they only mention a couple of things here. Notice they don't mention, they say introduce a tax on the excess profits of large corporations, banks and gas companies. Do you agree with that? Introduce short-term price caps on rent and gas prices. Support a significant reduction of individuals employed by the public service, which I think is definitely something that needs to be done. Prevent big companies from controlling the market and limiting consumer choices, e.g., supermarkets. You could say that. Introduce a tax on excess profits of large corporations. Sounds kind of good. You're just going off what they think. So these are just. I'm just going to go for a hypothetical, and we'll see what comes out. Alternatively, you can say, no, I don't agree with any of this. How should the federal government tackle Australia's housing crisis? Phase out tax concessions for property investors, e.g., negative gearing and capital gains tax discount. Disincentivize state territory governments to increase renter rights and protections. And if you know your policies from various parties, you can start to see the certain greeny ones that are, a little bit more in favor. Increase investment in public and community housing, which is going to drive up your taxes. Allow first home buyers to access their super to help purchase their first home. I think that's not a bad idea. Incentivize state territory governments to increase housing supply. It probably should be done, but you see, that's just incentivized. It's very vague to me. I want to know more about that. Help first home buyers with shared equity programs that would allow participants to co-purchase a home with the government. Now, that is a recipe for disaster. Out of all those, I think allowing us to use our super. But again, in this scenario, tackling the housing crisis, why isn't there lower immigration? Notice that hasn't been put in there, because that is a solution to this scenario. So I'm starting to see a bias in this already just by looking at the questions. How should the federal government cut household power bills, provide energy bill rebates? Well, you just cut, that's coming straight out of your taxes. It's a waste of time. Increase financial support for energy efficiency upgrades. Again, that's coming out of my taxes. I've got to pay for that. Increase funding for community batteries that increase access to solar and potentially set fire to my house. Strengthen regulations to prevent price gouging by energy companies. That could be an interesting one, but I think I'm going to say none of the above because I smell a rat. Or do we tick that one just to see what happens? Decisions. I agree, Don. Never co-purchase with the government. They cannot be trusted. And even if you like the government today, you may not like the government tomorrow. So it's a risky move. How should the federal government improve affordability and quality of education for Australians? Make university education free. Well, that'd be wonderful, except I'll be paying for that too. Cut a portion of existing student debt. Well, that's not a bad idea. Support more fee-free TAFE places. That's leading to Labor government because that's what they've been spruiking. Increase funding for public schools. Well, that's not a bad idea. But the problem is I don't like the curriculum. So I'm not sold here. Increase funding for and access to child subsidies. Interesting. Nothing about homeschooling. Nothing about, helping parents out there. But, again, I see a bias here. I'm going to go none of the above. Stop fossil fuel project approvals and expansions. What should the federal government do to cut climate pollution? So, again, we know this is going on. Of course, they've got to read more. So they're trying to tell you, spin the thing. I'm not even going to worry about their spin. Stop fossil fuel project approvals and expansions, accelerate the rollout of renewables, strengthen policies that ensure Australia's biggest polluters genuinely cut their emissions. There is no climate pollution. It's not even an option. You only can say none of the above. You can't say I disagree with this shit. Interesting, isn't it? Again, I'm seeing this bias as more and more little green things keep popping up. How should the federal government ensure all Australians have access to affordable and accessible healthcare? So increase investment to potential health programs, make GP visits free or more affordable by increasing bulk billing incentives. You know you're paying for this. You know, again, these are socialist ideas where we're going to suck the money out of you. Increase funding to train, attract, and retain more healthcare professionals, especially in regional areas. Well, that could be of benefit. Increase funding for dental and mental health. I think we've got a lot of funding. I think the problem is the actual industry itself. Expand subsidies to make more prescription medicines cheaper. Again, that's coming out of my taxes, and my taxes are already heavily strained. Is there an idea here that doesn't involve spending more money? You know, in fact, because they all do that, I'm going to say none of the above, because you haven't actually come up with a root problem like make Australia healthy again, to coin a phrase. So with all coal power stations set to retire by 2038, so again, they're pushing the climate narrative. That's twice now. How should the federal government ensure a reliable energy transition? Increase investment in large-scale renewables, require multinational gas companies to prioritize domestic, invest in nuclear as a future. So I'm kind of feeling nuclear is probably a better thing, while extending the life of coal power and increasing gas use in the interim. So this makes more sense, you know. If you're going to go that way, obviously you could say, nah, bugger it all, burn more coal. I don't see that being an option, just none of the above. Again, you know, you see the things are being guided in a direction. How should the federal government improve transparency, accountability, integrity of politics and government? Improve access to government-held information about government policies and decisions. Sounds good. Protect the ABC and SBS independence and funding. Now, how about we make them actually accountable for their left bias? That's not there. Require all lobbyists that meet with politicians to be publicly disclosed. I think that sounds pretty good. All right, continue. All right, make public transport more frequent and reliable. How should the federal government cut transport emissions? Again, you know, improve bike park. I don't. This is a third greening question. Increase access to affordable electric load. None of this. None of this. You know, improve bike paths and footpaths to encourage active transport. It's probably not a bad idea, but do I tick it? Am I being trapped into a greeny phase? Look, I actually like that idea, so fuck it, we're going to go with it. All right, so what is the top issue impacting your vote this election? The top one. Prices is probably a pretty high one. Again, a lot of these things are the options aren't that great. There's no excessive immigration. There it is. Cool. I'm going to say immigration. That's my top one, I reckon, because it leads to most of the problems. 3 other issues that are important to you this election: prices, energy security, I'll go with defense. Why not? That sounds good. So energy security, prices, defense, immigration, that's kind of where I'm going, because all the rest of it isn't really all that. Most of it's lefty sort of stuff. You know? Anyway, let's go. See what it comes out with. Which party would you typically put as your number one preference? I'm going to say other. And sadly, I have to click that box. And definitely, I can tell where I should be and what's going on. I know what's between my legs. Darren's there. G'day, mate. Just 1 second. I'll finish this and see what comes out of this actual little thing here, and we'll bring you in, buddy. So where am I again? I'm in Dawson. So let's have a look and see what it says. Now, this all went pear-shaped when I tried to do it on how to use a ballot paper. All right, continue. Drag and drop candidates. Continue. You choose your own preferences. Save it for the election day. All right, cool. So it's come back and it's saying I mostly align with the People First Party, which, you know, is not too bad. Amazingly, though, it's given me an LNP second, then Trumpet of the Patriots, then One Nation, Labor, Greens, and Family First didn't get a mention. And I actually did different answers the last time. And again, Family First didn't get a mention the last time either. which I'm starting to see a bit of a bias. In fact, this looks very similar to what I got last time, except I have changed a couple of answers, and amazingly, One Nation was down here. It was down the bottom, which I didn't see how that worked. But yeah, very fascinating. I don't agree with the way it's actually come out with this. And as I've pointed out, there were a lot of issues in there that I felt they didn't deal with. And I felt it was very green biased in the way it was continuously worrying about climate change. As you know, I think it was 3 times it was totally mentioned throughout this thing. So who exactly Build a Ballot is, I haven't had a chance to figure it out. But like I said at the beginning here, when we go back to the beginning, it does say, there's a transparency center. We'll probably find out. Tegan Lerm, a Project Planet, which seems to me, just by the name, indicate we're looking at some sort of green or teals group. But I'll probably have to look into this a little bit further. Darren's patiently waiting, so we'll come back to that depending on how we go for time. It is now time to bring in the man of the hour. Darren, how are you, brother?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
Very good, my friend. Very good. Thanks heaps for coming in on this last minute podcast that I've put together. Our other guests unfortunately didn't make it, but you were here to save the day, thankfully, and you've got some amazing news for us, my friend. So
yeah, it's quite interesting. So today has been a huge day. Actually, the last few days have been huge in the Gap camp, and I've just been doing a lot of work with Rod, and there's a lot of revelations that have come to the table, and we finally nutted out the last part of this corporate queen that we have, this corporate king that we have, the King of Australia, the king of the Queen of the United Kingdom, and it's quite interesting because it's a bit of a historical story, just so that the listeners can understand it. And I'll take them through it. So basically, before 1952, there was a British Empire. And the British Empire had one monarch that ruled across the whole empire. So the Queen of the United Kingdom was the Queen of Australia, the Queen of Canada. It was the one title covered all of the different realms. There was only one indivisible monarch, which means the monarch could not be divided. And then after 1952, there was an economic meeting in London, and all of the representatives of all the different realms, like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, etc., they all assembled in London for this economic meeting, and they decided to divide the crown. And because the empire had ended, the empire had fallen because of the 2 world wars. And now they created localized domestic crowns for each of the realm. So all of a sudden, Australia created this new Queen of Australia. Canada had the Queen of Canada. New Zealand had the Queen of New Zealand, and so on. And each of those localities were now operating under a domestic monarch. They were no longer under the King or Queen of the United Kingdom. And this is very important, so you actually understand the flow of what actually occurred and how it affects everything today. So once they created a localized crown for each of the realms, well, prior to that, when the crown was indivisible and it was just one monarch over every realm, when one monarch passed away, which is known as the demise of the crown, when that occurred, all of the rights, the powers, the authorities transferred from the monarch that just passed to the new monarch. It was an automatic transfer because that monarch ruled exclusively everywhere over the whole British Empire. Now, after 1952, with a divisible crown, a divided crown, what happened was each of those crowns or once the crown, there was the demise of the crown, and there was a new monarch, the powers and authorities did not automatically transfer, because now those powers and authorities were actually enacted in each of the localities by a statute in that locality. So, we've got the Royal Styles and Titles Act here in Australia. There's the Royal Styles and Titles Act in New Zealand and in Canada, and so on. So for you to bring in that monarch as a localized monarch, you must create fresh legislation.
Yep.
Now, with the passage of time and this sovereign independence that Australia is claiming, with the Australia Act, what they've done a couple of things. Now, in the Constitution, there used to be this thing called reservation of bills, and what used to happen was the Governor General would reserve the bills for Her Majesty's pleasure. In other words, for Her Majesty to sign, if it related to Her Majesty's royal prerogative. And the royal prerogative were the powers that only the monarch can exercise. And one of those powers is the Royal Styles and Titles. So each time when there was a new Royal Styles and Title after 1952, they needed the monarch's seal of approval, the signature from the monarch, because it was her power. And this happened in 1953, happened in 1973 when we've had the two title changes. And the assent was given by the monarch because of the royal prerogative, so it was reserved. In 1986, when Australia allegedly became an independent sovereign nation, that power of reservation was taken away, okay, because there was no longer a reason to reserve bills, because Australia's sovereign and independent. They're the master of their own affairs, even though they have a British monarch exercising a localized title for that particular country. So now, if you move up today, and since the demise of Queen Elizabeth, what's actually occurred is the Australian government have failed to enact any legislation to create a new title for the king to be used for Australia. So currently at law, there remains the Royal Styles and Titles Act of 1973, and at law, our monarch is still Elizabeth II. So what the government did was they thought, well, we can't reserve the bill because the Australia Act took that away, and they can't exercise this prerogative. So they've put themselves into a conundrum. And so what they did is they got the Governor General, the executive government, the Executive Council ordered the Governor General to write a proclamation bringing in the title, proclaiming that the title was to apply to Australia. But there's a problem with that, because it's an executive action from the Executive Council, and because of the separation of powers doctrine in Australia, that doesn't apply to the judiciary, okay? There's a separation of powers, which means what applies to the executive cannot apply to the judiciary because they're separate and independent. So the executive have issued this proclamation that there's this new title, but it can't apply to the judiciary because of the separation of powers. So another conundrum. Now, what I've discovered is someone actually did this process correctly, because, and I thought about this prior. I'll get to that in a minute, but I've thought about this in the past. How would you have actually done this so it's valid? Well, before the demise of Queen Elizabeth, they should have enacted an act called the Royal Styles and Titles Act of whatever it is, 2021, before the Queen died, proclaiming the new title for the king. Queen Elizabeth could have given it the royal assent because she was officially still the monarch in Australia. and it was to come into existence on the day of the demise of Queen Elizabeth. That's how you could have done it. Okay. Or you write a law. Okay. You can't do that because you can't reserve the title. Or you write a law, another Royal Styles and Titles Act, that allows either the Governor General or the King to issue a royal proclamation bringing in the title for Australia. So none of that's happened. But now we can look to Canada for the correct process.
Right.
Because in 2023, Canada wrote their own Royal Styles and Titles Act upon the demise of Queen Elizabeth. And that particular act says this, and I'll read from it. It basically grants the King, where is it? Here we go. So it says this, a proclamation. Whereas the Parliament of Canada, by virtue of the Royal Styles and Titles Act 2023, which was assented to on June the 22nd, 2023, assented to the issue by His Majesty of his royal proclamation under the Great Seal of Canada, establishing for Canada a royal style and titles. Now know you that we, by and with the advice of our Privy Council for Canada, and under order in council, do by this our proclamation establish for Canada the following royal styles and titles. Charles III, by the grace of God, King of Canada, and his other realms and territories, head of the Commonwealth. That's how you do it. That's how you do it at law. See, what has to happen...
Did they get that with royal assent before the part? I can't even remember when she passed. Like, did they do that before or after?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Maybe someone, because she died I think she died in 2022. So I'm going to say it was after. Okay. Now it goes on and says various other things, but fundamentally, this is the process that should have occurred. So the Australian government should have written an act to provide or to empower the executive government to write a proclamation, or the Governor General, should I say? My mistake, the Governor General, or the King, the Governor General or the King. But in Australia, the Governor General acts as the King's representative, so it's quite valid that the Governor General would write the proclamation, bringing in the title as Canada did. Now, that hasn't happened. And at law, the current title, the current monarch's title in Australia is Queen Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen of Australia, her other realms and territories, head of the Commonwealth. That's the current title at law. Okay, let's talk about election writs.
Right.
Here's where the nuclear bomb should start going off. So an election writ is issued in the name of the monarch at law. Okay.
So we've got a dead woman authorising our current election.
Yeah. And I'll point out another thing. The Royal Styles and Titles Act doesn't say Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, Queen of Australia, her other realms and territories, head of the Commonwealth. Okay. They don't mention the heirs and successors. So the title cannot be passed down to the new monarch. Wow. So at law,
that's a pretty severe oversight.
Exactly. To write a writ in Australia, at law, one must point to the law for the identity of the monarch, so as to create the writ. But there's this constitutional conundrum going on, where there's this void, where basically Queen Elizabeth has died, but she's still legally the Australian monarch at law. And we only have this proclamation that is not empowered by any act of the executive government. So that's the issue.
So we've got that, I get my head around it. We've basically got almost a case of necromancy going on with our legal state here. There's a dead woman at the front of the ship. But what does this mean for Australia at this particular time? We were discussing earlier, like, does this mean that everything that's been done since she died is no longer valid? Does this, now that we've established that the election writ itself isn't even valid, does that mean we can't have an election? And if they do go ahead and have an election now that it's been pointed out, what does that mean? It seems like this is a huge can of worms. And
look, it is like Australia's legal system. It's just a basket case of law. Look, having said that, now your first question was, does this mean that everything's invalid since Queen Elizabeth died? I'll say this: there's a doctrine in law which a law is not invalid until it's proclaimed invalid. And I would say the courts would run off that. Okay, so you brought this to the table now. Okay, bang. We have to fix everything, but everything's valid up until the time it's proclaimed invalid. So no, that wouldn't. Technically, you're right. Okay, but I don't think the courts would look at it like that. I think they would apply this particular doctrine, which says that everything's valid until it's proclaimed invalid. So when you take a law that's beyond power, or any type of law to the High Court, and they proclaim it to be invalid, it was valid until they proclaimed it to be invalid, even though it was invalid, even though they're invalidating it because it was invalid. That's how it works. Because just think, if something was invalid for 50 years and you did all this stuff for 50 years, well, you'd have to invalidate a lot of stuff, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And if you've built buildings and infrastructure on this invalid construct, what are you supposed to do? Go and bulldoze the whole lot? Like, it doesn't make sense. So we're going to have to progress along as normal, it would seem. And I think regardless of the situation, the system's going to want to do that because it's their self-preservation instinct is going to kick in, and they're going to want to maintain whatever rule and power they have, as Emperor Palpatine, points out in Star Wars 3, which has absolutely no legal bearing whatsoever, but it's an interesting point nonetheless, is that all those who have power are afraid to lose it.
Exactly, 100%. Now, I'll go on and say this. Of course, you're aware that I share a lot of this work with Rod Cullerton, and I work closely with Rod.
I am, and I'm guessing a lot of the audience have just figured that out if they didn't know beforehand.
Okay, so if anyone wants to read up on the detail of what we just discussed and have a look at the Canadian Act as well as the Australian Proclamation, you can have a look at the one of the latest two posts on Constitution Watch, and it's titled "Are the Australian election writs valid?" And additionally, what's happened today, and it's quite interesting because our phones have been going crazy all day, and well, for the last 3 days.
Yeah.
And so today, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Australian Electoral Commission have made many complaints to the Australian Federal Police against Rod, saying that he's bankrupt.
Yes, and that's how they removed him from Parliament in the first place all them years ago. No.
Well, yeah. But I'm talking in regards to election writs. So there's the two ones. Are the election writs valid? And that's what we've just discussed. And this is the complaint. And it's interesting because, as I said, the AEC have again gone and made a complaint about Rod running in this election.
Mm.
And so what's actually occurred is at the previous election, they did the same thing. They reported it to the federal police, and Neil Pitchener and Rod actually went in and had an interview. And I think we're going to possibly be releasing that interview this week because the actions of the AEC are not warranted. And it's as simple as this. Rod is not bankrupt under the Commonwealth because the Commonwealth was dissolved in 1973. Now, one other thing that the listeners need to know, if you go back and you have a look at the history of the AEC, the Australian Electoral Commission, I think the Australian Electoral Commission have only been around since, I think, the mid-80s.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it was the Commonwealth Electoral Commission. Now, the Commonwealth Electoral Commission and the Australian Electoral Commission are not the same entity. They are not one in the same. One, they didn't just change the name, branding, as the government like to call it. They are two independent, separate entities. Now, when they reported Rod to the police 4 years ago, what happened? Neil and Rod went in. They were interviewed by the Australian Federal Police, and Rod and Neil pointed out these particular anomalies that the AEC were not the Commonwealth Electoral Commission, and this bankruptcy was not a bankruptcy under Commonwealth law, but under Australian law. And the AEC, the federal police, you know what the federal police said to the AEC? We've investigated, and there's no offence.
Nice. But they're still playing this card again, even though it's
they've reported him. So we got sick of it. And I said to Rod about a month ago, I said, well, I won't tell you the exact words I said, but it was of the effect that let's give them what they're giving us.
Yeah. Turn it around.
So
the mirror.
Oh, exactly. So the Australian Electoral Commission have, the Governor General has issued the writs, and the Australian Electoral Commission are acting upon them, and they have an obligation to make sure that they're valid.
Yes.
So Rod's reported the commissioner because of all the information that we just discussed prior to us getting onto this subject.
So Rod's reported them to the AEC have now got a taste of their own medicine. Are we likely to see anything done before the weekend? Because, I mean, there's an election happening this weekend. It's all right at the last minute sort of thing. You know, how likely is it that the federal police are going to go, oh, yeah, there's something here, quick, shut down all elections until further notice, we've got to investigate? Or did they let everything go through as normal and let's hope this goes unnoticed? Or are we going to, let's go through it and then maybe we can patchwork this later? You know, the ship hasn't sunk. It's just got a few holes in it. Quick, throw buckets, more buckets. You know, what are they going to do, I guess, is the $1 million question. We don't really know, but it's definitely not looking good for them.
It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. I would say that if there is no movement from the official channels, then I would say that the election writs will be challenged. Now, one thing, as I was saying earlier, the one thing that the Australian government rely on, it's on their website, is this thing called continuity of the crown, where everything, and this is what they're relying on. They're going, but when the monarch dies, all the powers just automatically transfer.
That would be true if they didn't fuck with all the laws.
Well, that would be true if it was if the British Empire was still about and it was an indivisible crown. Once you divide the crown up and you create laws in each realm to bring about a localized crown, then there's no automatic transfer. It's done by legislation. And this is the unfortunate thing that the government are relying on. And as I said, all we have to do is look to Canada to see how
it should have been done.
Constitutionally, the process should be finalised. So
is it a case for the government then to just come in and go, oh, shit, we fucked up. Thanks, Darren. You've pointed it out. We'll go and have a look at Canada. Quick, scribble, pass a few bits of paper. Bob's your auntie. We're all good.
They prorogued the parliament. Parliament's been dissolved.
All right.
See,
now
what
you
happens,
better explain that.
Okay, before an election happens, they dissolve the parliament.
Right.
And it goes
when they go into caretaker mode.
Yeah, it goes into administration, caretaker mode, exactly. Okay, so there's no ability to go into parliament and to wrong the right. Wow. Right the wrong, should I say.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's basically what's going on. You can't do anything legislatively. Like I'm hearing you, quick, let's go into parliament. Let's quickly run a bill, get it passed by both houses overnight. Bang, no more conundrum. But it can't happen because we have a dissolved parliament in caretaker mode.
We still have active state governments, though. So have we, in effect, reverted to, a pre-federation construct where the states are now in complete power?
No. Look. This is the thing. There's this. I know some people have this idea that the Commonwealth has more power than the states, and it doesn't. The states have more power than the Commonwealth.
Yeah, generally, yeah.
So
they demonstrated that during COVID, where the states were calling the shots.
Yeah. So the Commonwealth only exists and its lawmaking powers because the states gave up those powers at federation, so the Commonwealth government could be created, and so that there was a centralised form of government. So that's what federation was all about. So the states or the Commonwealth isn't like, and then some people think, well, it's almost like a parent-child relationship where the Commonwealth are the guardians of the states. No, the states exist or existed prior to the Commonwealth in their own right. Okay, the states do not have a international personality, and they can't do business with other international or sovereign nations. Only the Commonwealth can. Only the Commonwealth can enter into treaties. That's why I look at there's some state governments in the last year or two that have been creating treaties with particular races. This is the thing. You have to be a sovereign independent nation to enter into a treaty, international law. There's much literature on this already. There's even a paper, it's on my site, it's from the Attorney General's office I think it's from the 80s, and they go extensively into this, that a treaty could only be established with the Commonwealth. So that's the thing. Do you have the legal capacity in today's political sphere to enter into a treaty? That's the question. Well,
it certainly opens up that door because, the first thing I think of, the first thing I think of, I'll say I'm the Premier of Queensland. Wouldn't that be wonderful? The world would be so much a better place. But, we'll continue with that another day. the idea, okay, cool. I'm running the show here. The federal government's just dropped the ball. So the solution is I've got to declare myself a sovereign, independent nation, or a nation state, perhaps in some case, to keep Queensland running. But then we've got however many tribal folk moving in at the same time, saying, thanks for dropping the ball. Now it's time for us to exert our sovereignty that we've never before ceded properly.
Yeah, look,
Is this a scenario that could unfold?
This is the thing. The voice referendum failed. Okay, that was the Commonwealth attempt. Now, as soon as that failed, the states went, we're going to jump in and do it ourselves.
Okay. But they have no capacity to make that treaty.
Yeah, and there's a lawmaking power in Section 51 that they can make special laws for particular races. Well, the states don't have that power. Okay, so it's a specific law about a particular race, regardless of the race. The states don't have the power. Only the Commonwealth does. Okay, it's an exclusive power in Section 51. Now, they can write laws on health, for example, Aboriginal health or Aboriginal sport or whatever it happens to be. Okay, that's not directly on that specific race. That's just a benefit. So, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one, but. Look, the states are, and I suppose what will happen is eventually down the line, someone will probably challenge some of these laws. Some of those laws that they were bringing in, I know in Western Australia, were basically allowing people to take over other people's land. It's with Mabo. What happened was the High Court basically said that any land that has been that you purchased in fee simple, that land cannot be given back. Okay, but any Crown land, okay, open slather, you can claim it all back. Okay, and if you go and speak to the brothers out there, they don't want to take anyone's land. Yeah, they want the Crown land. Okay, but they're not interested in going to war with people. They want peace like everyone else.
That's generally been my experience as well. With the exception of a few. Then we can't tar anybody or any particular group as the same as the rest. You can't tar everyone with the same brush. But in the majority, I think there's a lot of Indigenous folk out there that just want to get along. It's definitely been my experience. That's what's going on. But there are a couple of questions here we might get through because I'm starting to see them pile up. The disestablishment does what they like. So how do we empower people? Says Robin.
Once again, you've got to vote in the minor parties. You've got to vote in the people.
Our elections, like they've just all gone up in smoke.
People are coming up with all these wacky different ideas and overthrow the government and everything like that. Look, I'm not encouraging you to do that, but that's not illegal to do that. That's the thing. That is one way through conquest, but the most honourable way to do it is through the polls.
Yeah.
So you've got some great candidates out there. There's some amazing candidates out there, and people should really look locally to vote rather than to the preferred two.
Yes, definitely.
The two-party system, it's got this hold in this country, and they've been writing these laws to basically aid themselves. You know, there's a law in the Electoral Act that allows the electoral officer, when, like, let's say they start counting the votes and they see, oh, this particular candidate, he's got 10% of the vote. I'm gonna make a prediction that he's going to win, and let's preference, all the votes are now preferenced to them, regardless if they weren't or not, were or were not. So, and apparently there's some legislation coming in after the election that basically does similar things, which basically puts the minor parties at a disadvantage. Also, you know, Anthony Albanese a couple of years ago, all the minor parties, they had all their staff funding slashed, and they can't have the same amount of staff as what the two-party preferred do. So there's this discrimination straight away.
Yeah.
It's
There's
crazy.
definitely a problem there. There was a couple here started from Martin, but I think by the end we'll just skip those two because we've got this one sort of gets more to the point. So if the writs fail, where to for Australia with caretaker government?
If the writs fail, so if they're seen to be invalid, they would have to fix the conundrum and issue the writs correctly. So the same thing would occur.
And again, how do we do that while the government's in caretaker mode? No one's there at the helm to do so.
That's a good question. Although they're in caretaker mode, I believe when there's emergencies that arise such as this, they can act in a minor way, but this isn't acting in a minor way. No. I suppose the Governor General, there's powers that the Governor General could possibly exercise because he's part of the executive, but fundamentally he has to act off advice from his ministers, so his hands are tied too. So it would be very interesting to see exactly how that would play out. I don't know if this has ever happened in history before.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're saying in a minor capacity. Well, what if China were to invade tomorrow and we're in caretaker mode? There's got to be some sort of something in there to go, hang on, we need to get shit sorted here, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So those are the same, the sorts of situations where the administrator can step up to the plate. They are still there, but they're on the campaign trail. But you can still get a response out of them 100%. Yeah. Where it would go to in this particular type of constitutional crisis, that would be interesting. I suppose it would come down to the Governor General. He would have to exercise particular powers under the Constitution in regards to the maintenance of the Constitution. There's certain powers there that are basically, well, I'll say this: the way that the powers are executed by the Governor General have changed since Federation. And let me say this: it appears that he's the Executive Council's bitch.
Right.
Let me say that. So, yeah, unfortunately, the same powers and the same level of powers are not being promoted as they were at Federation. And another reason being is because the letters patent have changed probably 2 or 3 times, and they've fundamentally been bastardized. There's no instructions that came with the last lot of letters patent. And, you know, like, for example, the equivalent of the Governor General in the States is the governor. And I can tell you this, in most states, the governor used to be the pinnacle of power, the source of power. The power flowed from the monarch into the governor, and then into the state officers. And now the governor, since about the 90s, the mid to late 90s, the governor of the state has now become a portfolio under the Premier and Cabinet's office. And once again, the governor is the Premier's bitch.
Yeah, you don't
So-
exactly hear much from these people anymore, do you? Like,
No. So the stream has risen above the source,
mm,
essentially, is what it's occurred. So now the Premier is basically ruling over the governor.
mm. So what happens to all our pre-poll votes? I guess they're held until things are sorted, I'm guessing. Shaz's question there.
I like that.
I
The
like
Governor
us.
General hasn't taken the correct oath.
Oh, hang on. Where that was the live comment.
The previous one.
Can you bring that one back up? Whoever's running comments out there, please.
I would say pretty much every sitting minister of the Commonwealth Parliament has not sworn the correct oath. Section 42 of the Constitution says that every member of the House of Representatives and the Senate must swear the oath of allegiance as found in the schedule to the Constitution. And the Constitution schedule says, I do swear true allegiance to Her Majesty, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God. And the first thing is, underneath that, there's a note in the schedule, and it says, the name of the King or Queen of the United Kingdom can be substituted from time to time, because the first oath was written that you're swearing to Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors.
Yeah.
So you can replace that with the King or Queen of the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
That backs up what Clause 2 of the Constitution says, which says that the Queen in the Constitution, all of the powers in the Constitution are exercised by the Queen, her heirs and successors, in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. So the High Court's interpreting that differently now. They're saying that's the Queen of Australia. But there's many documents that show otherwise. There's a little known report from 1988 called the Constitutional Commission Reports. And in this particular report, and this report went on for a long time, it was basically started in the States. There were commission meetings in the States, and then basically they did a report on all of those meetings. That was the first Constitutional Commission report, and then it went back again, and then there was the second Constitutional Commission report, which was the final Constitutional Commission report. And that basically, the commission recommended 42 bills to change the Constitution. And it's interesting, the first one was a bill to change the Constitution so as to recognise the Queen of Australia. Now, that bill was never presented to the people at referendum, because these were bills to be presented to the people for referendum. The bill's never been presented for referendum, so one can only come to the conclusion that if they were asking the people, they wanted to ask the people in a proposed bill to recognise the Queen of Australia in the Constitution, then the Queen in the Constitution is not the Queen of Australia. And it's interesting, Bill number 2, this one says it all. It seems we're just talking about Section 42 and the oath. It says it's a bill to change the Constitution so as to allow senators and members of the House of Representatives to swear oaths of allegiance to the Queen of Australia. Now, once again, it's to empower the Parliament, okay, to allow them to swear oaths of allegiance to the Queen of Australia. That bill, again, was never presented to the people at referendum. And therefore, the monarch in the Constitution, therefore, is not the Queen of Australia, because it was never enacted. So these bills that are recommendations to change the Constitution, to bring the Constitution into conformity with the changes that the Labor government had brought to the country beyond power over the years, basically they were tidying up these inconveniences. And it's funny because guess who was on the 1988 Constitutional Commission?
I wouldn't have a clue. Wasn't paying attention on it.
Gough Whitlam.
Really?
So in 1988, what's that?
The man who was removed
15 years after he created the Queen of Australia, he went in and recommended that we write some bills so as to change the Queen in the Constitution to the Queen of Australia and not the Queen in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom as it currently sits.
Even after being removed, he was still making a mess or attempting to clean one up.
Most certainly. Hey, one thing that we were talking about today, I was talking about with Rod, is it's interesting because the Australian government rely on the proclamation by the Governor-General to bring in King Charles's title, the King of Australia. And they're saying that, well, that's binding on everyone. And I just sort of looked at that and went, well, what about Clause 5 of the Constitution, which says it's the laws made by the Parliament of the Commonwealth under the Constitution that are binding, not the proclamations made by the Commonwealth. That's why you have to write a law so as to allow you to write a royal proclamation to bring in the title at law.
Wow. I know my head's swimming a bit. I can imagine a lot of people out there are probably feeling the same, if not worse. Probably by some of the things that are being said, there's probably a lot of people who have really, comprehended this quite well. So,
I hope I haven't confused you. I haven't been confusing.
No, it's pretty clear. I think it's just it's overwhelming. There's so much in there to wrap your head around. Like, it makes sense the way you present. It's always been the best amongst most of the people who are trying to explain it to the layman, much as myself. It just doesn't quite always get it straight away. You got a very good way of explaining things, I find, but. Yeah, it's a big can of worms, like I said, and there's so many ifs, buts, and maybes that go along with it. And like you said, this has never happened before, so how things turn out is going to be quite interesting. And again, I'll stand by that those in power certainly do not wish to lose power, so they're going to do everything they can to plug every one of those holes in this sinking ship. We have has Federation been dissolved? Martin asks. So, I mean, in the sense that it was dissolved and put into administration, I would say yes, but
no.
The Federation is
by asking has Federation been dissolved, you're asking has the Constitution been dissolved, because the Constitution is the book of Federation. No, clearly not. This is a standard practice all around the world, that the parliament's dissolved, goes into caretaker mode before the election. So it's standard practice. It really is.
Yeah.
Don't. I know a lot of people, because when was it? I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They dissolved the parliament, and there was a proclamation, and there was a 21-gun salute, and they televised it all, and people started going into meltdown. And it's like, I think it's actually the first time they've actually televised it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard much mention of it. Like, I know things
knew that it happened, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, you don't really hear too much about it either. Like, it's one of those things. I don't know. Maybe I've just had my head in the sand, but it's only in recent years that I've even come to comprehend what's going on. I guess most, again, I had one friend, call me up today after I did a podcast explaining how to sort of pick out who you should vote from the voting queue, going, how should I vote, man? And I'm like, yeah, cool. We are one of them last minute kind of people in a lot of cases. It's not till we're at the end that we go, oh shit, I better do my homework, So
I totally hear you. I can tell you this, Mark. This is this is a world exclusive, what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
I know Rod was on, he did a pre-recording on Graham Hood's podcast about it, but I'm not sure when that is, but it's been pre-recorded.
Yes,
And
I haven't been released yet.
we're going on a podcast in England tomorrow with this, and it goes international. So this is the world exclusive.
Cool. Thank you very much for bringing it to North Queensland Freedom Network and the Cafe Lockout community. I think we're all pretty appreciative to be the first ones to hear it, unless you're subscribing to the Constitution Watch page. I guess that people who are watching that avidly certainly knew what was going on.
They heard about it a couple of hours before this, because I've been so flat out, and we've been the preparation to be able to unpack this. It's quite in depth, and you've got to make sure that these positions that we stand in are valid. Okay, and I can assure you that they are valid. The extensive research that that Rod's team does is quite in depth. So
now you've mentioned the whole concept of they hadn't enacted the King's title properly before on Know Your Rights shows and whatnot. So that component of it has been sort of out for a little while. How much more? I mean, obviously, it's taken quite a long time to sort of put this together. If you can you put a time frame on how long it's taken to nut this out?
I joined forces with Neil Pitchen in 2015, and Neil's the original author of the 2004 FOI to the Prime Minister and Cabinet's office that shows that there is no head of power to create a Royal Styles and Titles Act for the Queen's title. So they had no power to do it, and I'll quickly explain to the viewers, in the Commonwealth there's a thing called the enumerated powers doctrine. The enumerated powers are the numbered powers found in section 51. There's 39 of them. It's fundamentally 39 lawmaking powers that the Commonwealth have, and they're very specific in their subject matters, and the Commonwealth must point to a valid head of power for the creation or the valid creation of a piece of legislation. And there is no valid head of power for the Royal Styles and Titles Act. So Neil,
that was pointed out to them in 2015. They've had 10 years to fucking sort this out. It's been 3 years, well, not exactly, but closer to 2. It was the end of 2022. So we'll say 2.5 years since the Queen's passing, and they're still allowed this to keep going.
Of course.
Madness.
This is the thing. This is the arrogance of these governments. They're too busy focused on their climate change bullshit.
Yeah.
To actually understand what they should be doing. Now, there used to be consultation between the realms. In fact, the Statute of Westminster and the 1953 Royal Styles and Titles Act both said that if one of the realms was considering changing the royal style for the monarch, there had to be prior consultation between all of the realms. They all had to agree, and that's never occurred, even though it's written into law. Okay. So, and we confirm this. We've written to New Zealand and Canada, for example, asking them if there was prior consultation and for the assent that Parliament had given for the change to the Royal Styles and Titles Act in 1973, and they got back and they said no, there was no prior consultation. Okay, so although the acts have basically prescribed that there should be, and this is the very reason why there should be, and even if you go back and you look into a lot of the papers in regards to the change of the titles, there was sometimes, and I think it was just in 1953 when it first happened, they were going back and forth, okay? And the governments were talking to each other in regards to how to style the title, okay? And they came up with this formula, okay, that was common to all. And that was about the only consultation. Now, if they had have done, this is the thing, we're all sovereign independent nations. We don't have to talk to each other. So there hasn't been consultation, and they haven't worked out that, hey, there's a particular process that we need to follow now, because we can't reserve the bills for Her Majesty's pleasure for the Queen to provide assent. Can't do that any longer because we're sovereign and independent. That was only an indivisible crown. So now the crown's divisible, it's divided, and there's localized crowns. Well, we don't have to talk to each other. And that seems to be the attitude that they've taken all along since, at least the 70s. I'll say this. I don't think the constitutional experts in Australia that the government rely upon, I don't think they're up to speed of what's meant to occur. Because, come off it. If someone like me can work it out, why can't they work it out? This is their job.
Yeah.
This is what they went to university for. This is what they did extra study for. This is what they continue to study for. And they continue to advise the government, but it's clearly ill advice.
Yeah.
That's what gets me. I'm at a loss to explain it, how you could be so incompetent.
I guess, the only thing I can fathom is they've just become so complacent, and nobody's being taught the Constitution, its basis. Like you've said many a time, we're not like the Americans that can just quote the constitutional rights, at the drop of a hat. Most people have got no idea. I've dumbfounded many of people, at a party and gone, cool, can you name me one right you've got? And deer in the headlights. They don't fucking know. And it's like, don't you think that's concerning? That you don't know that. How long did you go to school to not know that?
Batty, I don't even go to parties and talk about the Constitution. So
I wasn't even talking about the Constitution in general. Just do you know any of your rights? Just to.
It's like a vegan. Batty walks into a party. Hi, my name's Mark. Would you like to talk about the Constitution?
Oh no, you got to butter them up, and with something completely irrelevant first, and then just drop it in the middle of a conversation just to see the reaction. It's worth it, man. You should try it. I think you'd have a lot more fun than I would.
Yeah, I'm sure I would. Look, I only unless I'm compelled do I start going down those rabbit holes. But yeah, and I'd like to say hello to all the vegans out there watching as well, because their vote, it counts as much as the carnivores.
That's it. Yeah, we've all got to eat something. That's just how it is.
Exactly. So, but no. Look, they really, I suppose, what you're hitting on the fundamental point there is that there needs to be more discussion in regards not just to rights, but really probably the loss of rights. It's the loss of rights that
even the loss of knowledge.
Well, the loss of rights compel people to act. So eternal vigilance is the price of freedom.
Yes.
Eternal vigilance. You can't just keep on going to the footy, watching the movies and playing video games. You need eternal vigilance, because this is the thing. If you're shackled to your home and you're locked down in your home all the time, what sort of life have you got? It's amazing the whittling away of rights. Look, one thing that I would raise is imagine, because I remember you said earlier, does this invalidate everything back to when Queen Elizabeth died? Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot of interesting things that have happened since then. Digital ID acts.
Yeah.
What else is there? There's a lot of
Well,
those
the
acts.
freedom of speech has been
The freedom of
attacked.
speech, yep.
Yeah.
Director ID.
Yeah.
There's many of those acts.
Mm.
So what's this?
They can all be challenged in a way now. So that's I guess that's the thing. So at this particular stage, looking at this letter, he's Rod's sent this letter today. So
Yes.
obviously there's not going to be a response anytime soon. Do you think we could see
Oh no,
something
you'd
by the
be
end
you'd
of
be
the week?
surprised. You'll be
Yeah.
surprised. So
Surely 3 days at least for something like
I
this.
think about 3 weeks ago, Rod was referred to the federal police by the AEC, and I
Hmm.
think within 24 hours he got a phone call from the officer that interviewed him, I believe, last time.
Hmm.
And he's, Rod, how are you? And he's, yeah, I'm good. And he goes, here we go again.
Mm.
Okay. So, and they, I believe they said again, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
So now what's
Yeah, but
happened
that's
with the,
coming from previous experience. So in the previous occurrence, was it dealt with that quickly?
mm-hmm. um, the first time they dragged their feet a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it
I'd
did
imagine
happen.
there'd be a bit of they'd have to do a little bit of homework.
Yeah. You know what the AEC are doing now?
No, I haven't checked, to be
In
honest.
my language, it's called playing dirty pool.
Mm.
And because the AEC, the AFP have taken the position that they've taken, that there's nothing to see here, the AEC have taken situations into their own hands. And so what they're doing is they're not on all of the AEC literature, they're not spelling Rod's name correctly.
Oh,
They're spelling it
really?
with an R instead of Cullerton, Cullerton. So people
Right.
can't find his name.
Mm.
So Rod's also lodged a complaint against the AEC in respect of that as well,
And
because
then,
that could be
obviously we've
considered
seen
as
that.
misfeasance of office.
Mm. You think simple things like that, considering he's such a thorn in their side, you think they'd be able to spell his name? You think it'd conjure up some kind of memory for them, even if it was a bitter one? And we've seen the kind of shenanigans that they'll allow in certain places where, like with the purple vote yes scenario, that wasn't a problem. They seem
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be choosing specific sides that are no doubt beneficial to their own survival or their own empowerment or their own, I don't know, perhaps wages or benefits they may be receiving. Perhaps major
Exactly.
parties are promising them certain things. If you just go along and play our game, then there might be a couple of cookies and a bottle of milk at the end of this.
That's the thing. He's been a thorn in their side since 2016. I think they know how to spell his name.
You'd
And
think
if they
so.
don't, they ought to know.
Mm.
But they do. They do. That's the whole thing. So they're taking things into their own hands
Mm.
and they're playing dirty pool.
Yeah. And when we see, lawfare being drawn out and used in so many ways these days, not just here in Australia, but across the globe, it's become a bit of an issue. The way they've attacked Trump and things like that. Not to bring Trump into this, but it's certainly not the first time. We've seen how dictator Dan managed to drag out the whole bike boy scandal, and now finally it's been settled, out of court. We can see that sort of dirty scenario, the red shirts thing. There's a lot of dodgy shit going on here that needs to be brought to
Oh,
light.
totally. Totally
Um,
dodgy.
we
Yeah,
got one
it's
hell of a ride,
interesting
and we're
what's
going to need
unfolding.
we need a lot of people, hands on deck. A handful of people can't keep doing everything.
Has there been any response from the Liberal and Labor Party regarding?
I'm assuming the matter we've just brought up here is the
No, it's only all just been released right now. You probably know before them.
Yeah, unless they're watching this, I know Labor Party like to watch this one. You know, they're big fans.
Yeah,
of mine.
you know, quite possibly. But look, it's been released on social media. It's on the I believe it's on the Great Australia Party website. But yeah, it's today. Today was D-Day, or should we say AEC Day? And I hope they're enjoying the attention, because yeah, I made a promise to Rod about 3 weeks ago in respect of this, and we've delivered.
Yeah, nice. So I'm not seeing anything on the website specifically. It's not on the front page.
On the Gap website?
Yeah.
Knowing Rod, he's probably just got it on the Great Australia Party social media pages.
Yeah, Facebook and X and things like that, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
that'll require digging. Oh, hang on. There's a breaking news thing going here. But no link. Unless that's part of the how to vote card thing. It just says breaking news. Like here, I'll show you. I can't see anything.
Okay. What about if you go to news up the top there?
It's got documentary, interviews, Landgate, notice to Commissioner of Police. That's the 30th of June, 2023.
Yeah, I think there's a video of Rod and Neil with the federal police, the interview from 3 years ago and 4 years ago. And I believe we discussed about releasing that, because people need to be aware of the two-tiered system. It's much like the political parties.
Yeah.
In regards to Commonwealth and Australia. Because even the Australian Federal Police are not Commonwealth. They used to be called the Commonwealth Police as well.
Right.
All of that's been, you can go and have a look at it in all the old acts.
Martin's got a question here. Did government fuck up, or is this by design to hand back the country to us?
No, there's always a three-layer.
I'd be wondering if even, did they just hope that nobody'd notice while they try and roll out a republic anyway? I think that maybe that desperation to get that republic, it voices to
Let
Parliament.
me say this to Martin.
Attempts to try and cover that up,
Let me say this to Martin. He says, did the government muck up? Or is this some ruthless conspiracy type stuff? Like, do you reckon they're smart enough to work out these three-layer plans? I don't think so.
Well, as you said, or is this by design to hand back the country to us, the people? So did somebody dupe them? They're thinking they're doing the right thing, and somebody's encouraged them to leave a loophole, so that decent people can go and use it against them, perhaps, is maybe what he's getting at here.
Yeah, I've heard that theory before. I don't think so. I really believe. Have you looked at those people?
Yeah,
they're bumbling boobies. They really are.
Yeah, that's. I think like I've said about the mainstream media, that a lot of people have this notion that there's a major conspiracy going on, and that they're all meeting behind closed doors with the specific intention of do this, do that, and to a certain degree, it's true. They do have a meeting and they all agree with what to do, but they actually believe it. There's no like lizard man standing there barking orders or anything. They just go along with it because they think it's the right thing to do, which is even more scary than anything else.
100%. People just fall into line. They're in the habit of falling into line. They fell into line with the last idea, will fall into line with the next idea. Same with the media.
Yeah.
When you see, there's been some people who have tried to question premiers and when they've been with the Prime Minister, and they just, everything just goes to shit, because all of a sudden there's someone who's come in that's not one of their actors, and this isn't in the script. And they all just go into meltdown. Like, you think that there's this things are happening in real time, but even the press conferences, they're scripted. This is what happens when you give the media a tax-free status. They become, like the Governor General and the governors, your bitch.
Oh yeah. And they're very dependent on getting that email of a media release so they can fill that slot. And as the media gets tighter and tighter, there's less and less funding, there's less staff. They're very much dependent on easy stories landing on their desk. They haven't got time to do any real journalism. They haven't got any time to do any research. They certainly don't have the time to learn and comprehend what's really going on. And it's one of the shocking things I certainly realized, because I thought maybe it was just me as I was getting used to the way they did things, that you go home and you go, and somebody goes, so what did you do today? You'd be like, I survived. That's the only fucking thing I can think of. It's just such a shit show, And I noticed that other reporters were basically saying the same thing. Like, I would go home and I have no idea what we've done. So there's no memory retention, because it's just go, 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 go. Every decision you make is a snap decision. It's not well thought through. You're just doing shit to get the job done, And you watch the news and you look at, the way it's been slapped together. The transitions are all shit. The blurring of the faces looks like it was done by an amateur. The shots, they might be well shot sort of shots, but I mean, they only had to come up with enough for about 45 seconds. Most of it ended up on the floor. So if you've seen how much crap gets thrown away, sooner or later you throw enough shots together, you're going to get something half right. And again, it's just standard procedure. Pan, tilt. You get into a routine as a camera operator of just going through the checklist. Did I get my tight, medium, wide? Cool. Have I got time to do some pans? Quick chuck a couple of pans in there, and a few tilts here and there, If you're lucky, you can get an artistic shot in there and, use some depth of field and whatnot, but you probably won't. So it's, it's an interesting field, that's for sure. And it just reminds me a lot of the way the current school system is, particularly when, having to re-educate Tyler too, from the ridiculous way that they were teaching. He's like, I don't write neat because I haven't got time. I'm like, you do today, you're at home. That's all we're going to work on today because we have a problem to solve. So, in that environment, and it seems to start at an early age and progress all the way into their, later in life, they're doing the same thing. No real memory retention, just being a robot.
Yeah, I remember how frustrating it was for you when you started working with those groups up there. I'm not sure if anyone's aware, but Batty and I go way back.
Been around for a few years now.
And it's well, I suppose maybe there's a few people in Victoria that miss you even.
Yeah, I reckon there's a few. I'll come back maybe in summer.
In summer to get a rest from the heat.
Yeah. Well, it's a hell of a lot hotter here at that time of year. So yeah, it'd actually be kind of like moving back to winter in some cases.
Mark, I got to tell this story of when I last went to Townsville.
Okay, go for it. And I think I know where this is going.
So I went to Townsville. Mark says, give me a buzz once you're all settled in. I'm up there with a group of people, and I ring Mark and I say, come around, hang out. He says, yeah, I'll come around. So he comes around, and mind you, I think it was, what month was it? It was probably October.
No, it was more mid-year. I think it was about June or July, actually.
June or July, okay.
It was cold.
And no, it was 27 degrees.
Yes, that's cold.
It was 27 degrees, everyone. And so I opened there's a knock at the door, and I opened the door, and I'm in a t-shirt and shorts, I think. And we've got the sliding door open out into the balcony, and it's beautiful. The sun's, shining in. It's 27 degrees. We've just come from Melbourne. It's like, 15 degrees. And Mark walks in a hoodie.
Because you had the aircon on
degrees, but it's 27 degrees. I couldn't believe it.
I think the sun had just gone down. It was getting to that cold period. I mean, I went to the races with a couple of. So, well, it might have been. It might have been another time too. But anyway, I remember we were at the races with a couple of mates from Melbourne, and they're like, "Oh, well, we'll go sit over here in the shade." I'm like, me and a couple of Townsville mates were like, "Oh, I don't know about that. It's going to get cold soon." What do you mean? The sun's going down, and you'll be in the shade. She'll be cold. They thought we were fucking around till they seen me a bit later, and my teeth are chattering. I'm fuck. Should have brought a jumper, man. And they're like, "You're genuinely cold." I'm like, "Yeah, man. It's fucking cold. This is our winter."
Wow. It just blows my mind.
It's a lot easier to get accustomed to this weather than it is to Melbourne's, where it's just that constant roller coaster, I can tell you.
No,
but the people aren't here to watch us talk about the fucking weather, man. There is another question here from Quo.
Okay,
so what is the process to challenge the election writ? Or will this be a high court expensive hearing having constitutional jurisdiction? Excuse me, or do you wait and see? Well, I think there's a lot of wait and see.
You take it to the High Court, sitting as the House of Disputed Returns, because the election writ is returned, or the election writs are returned. So you dispute that return, and so it'll be quite interesting. It's I believe Rod's done it before in Western Australia. There's various people that have challenged the election writs. It's it's not a difficult process, especially when you're, I would say, basing it on a question of law.
And well, the election writs have been brought up quite a few times by various people as perhaps they are invalid, based on similar principles that it's, signed by the Queen of Australia as opposed to the Queen of England and various things like that. But in this case, we've got a whole different kettle of fish, Is it possible that those kinds of questions are going to come out in the wash in this?
Yeah, this is a situation that's never occurred before in Australian history. And probably not in British history as well, because once again, this indivisible crown is only, or this divisible crown has only happened since 1953. Fundamentally, we've only had one monarch right through that period until 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So.
He had one hell of a reign.
There's been one change of the guard, only one change of the guard since they brought this in. And this is why they're a bit rusty. They don't know what they're doing because this has never happened before.
That's a fair point. Canada. Although those who have, got any kind of experience with these sorts of things are, most likely long past or at least, perhaps even beyond capacity.
Yeah, look, all I can say is that there should have been prior consultation with each of the British realms that are now sovereign independent nations, and this could have probably been avoided, but of course the Australian government, being a Labor government, are quite arrogant in their position. And I do believe they like to do it their own way, and they have a they are vehemently opposed to doing things in a structurally constitutional way. They have utter disdain for the Constitution. In fact,
I'd say even the people.
Their core policies are in in conflict with the Constitution, and they want to change everything to suit or to structure around their core policies. And one of them is the abolition of property rights. And this is what Labor voters should know.
And sadly, they don't seem to realise, and you'd think even simple things such as, well, cigarettes and alcohol being the simple working man's pleasure has been taxed to death by your beloved Labor government. They are the Workers' Party. So I've got another one. Does the government, it's been, started, cool. Does the government and all the courts have constitutional watchers as good as yourself, Darren? Clearly not, would be my instant response to that.
Look, I'm sure this is the thing. I'm sure they have people in place, but do they listen to them? There's another thing. So there was a couple of years ago when this happened, there was a story in the Guardian, I believe, in regards to exactly what I'm talking about, that there's been no legislation, that the government have not enacted legislation, and that they are relying on this proclamation. And there were legal scholars and experts that were standing up going, no, that's wrong. But still, the Labor Party, once again, they just like to ignore these types of people, because you can go and find it online. I looked at it. I looked it up today. So yeah, there was some reports on that in respect of about 3 years ago, and it was raised. These things were raised, and the government failed to acknowledge or failed to act, and they ought to have acted. It's as simple as that. They ought to have known they should have acted.
I can't help but feel that perhaps a lot of people, in Australia, will go and look at something in the media and go, cool, nah, it's all sorted. The media have reported on it. It'll be fine now. It'll get fixed.
Yeah,
I think what a lot of people fail to understand is they've reported it to you. It's now you, the people's responsibility to do something about that. You've been given the information. Are you going to go back and watch the footy, or are you going to get up and do something? That's the thing. You can lead the horse to water. True. You can't make him drink.
Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom.
Yeah.
Sometimes definitely. You have to turn the footy off.
And on that note, actually, something that somebody said, I've seen it on I think it was another podcast, actually, and they were referring to, a story in the Bible, that I was unaware of. Apparently there's a point there where, where Moses has grabbed everybody and they're, on their way out of Egypt, and things aren't going so well, as, they've been slaves for so long that the idea of freedom had suddenly become, oh shit, what do we do? This is all Moses's fault. He's a revolutionary and he's all his crazy ideas. He's conned us. Oh no, it's all Moses's fault. We were better off as slaves. I'm concerned for my fellow man in a lot of regards when I hear that story, because I kind of was very reminiscent in a lot of cases of things I've unfortunately had to witness with people as they make that transition from understanding where we were, where you are now, and where you want to be.
Yeah, 100%. That's one thing that's happening, and has been happening for a long time. The people have had no direction because the government are on a particular road that we don't want to be on. So they're on the road to totalitarianism.
Yeah.
And this is what people are failing to acknowledge. They're failing to acknowledge that Australia have entered into treaties, international treaties, and now they have international obligations. And this is why you're seeing all these climate change things and all these laws coming in that limit you from exercising your right to the free enjoyment of your own property. The digital prisons that are being installed at the moment through legislation. You know, people don't understand what that's going to bring, because if you don't have what's called the mark of the beast, then you will not be able to trade and you will not be able to buy and sell.
Yeah.
So these are things that were said to be conspiracy theories, and possibly quite still are, but everything else from those areas of information have come to fruition. So we're in that slow transitional phase where we're actually moving towards that digital prison, where you can't go anywhere without having your biometrics scanned. Okay, you know, I went to the bank today to deposit some cash.
I remember.
And the woman was like, "Oh, you've got cash." And she just hands me a piece of paper. She goes, "Can I have your signature, please?" And I go, "Well, what do you need my signature for?" She says, "Oh, do you have our banking app?" I go, "No, I don't have the banking app." "Oh, well, I'm going to have your signature." Anyone, she says to me, anyone that brings in $1,000 or more into the bank, we have to ID $1,000. She goes, "It's because of anti-money laundering and terrorism, the Anti-Money Laundering and Terrorism Act." And I go, "Really? $1,000? So someone's going to take over the country with $1,000 and you have to ID them?"
You can barely afford to go shopping with that.
But this is where my mind goes to. $1,000. Like, you know, $1,000 doesn't go very far these days.
Yeah.
It gets you a tank of fuel and a couple of
barely
heads of
get
lettuce.
you through the week. Barely gets you through the week.
So, you know, this and I know many people that have been taken to task in regards to the anti-money laundering and Terrorism Act.
They tried that shit with me.
Oh, they did it to me, and I got they froze the account, and I got I think it was AFCA involved, and so and I said to them, we had a meeting with the bank, and I said, "I called your anti-money laundering task force that the bank has, and they said there were no red flags on my account."
Yeah.
And then I phoned your anti-terrorism branch, and the same thing, no red flags. I go, "So why am I being scrutinised under the Act? Why are you looking at me as a terrorist and an anti-money launderer, and that I have to prove myself that I'm not?" Because that's not innocent until proven guilty. If you think I'm laundering money, and if you think I'm funding terrorism groups, you bring the evidence to me and you make the claim.
Exactly.
Okay. This place is starting to turn into Nazi Germany. It really is, where you, to go to the bank, have to prove who you are to access your money. It's crazy. And I tell you what, if I'm associated with anyone that gets into Parliament, we're going to go after those laws, because I'm telling you that to walk into a bank and to be treated like a criminal, where you're being scrutinized to see whether you're a terrorist, or whether you're funding terrorist groups, or whether you're laundering money for some nefarious reason.
Like survival.
If you've got the evidence, if I'm putting money into the Al Qaeda Proprietary Limited bank account, then fair enough. Maybe you might be onto something.
Yep.
You know, like I get it. Okay, I get it. You've got to protect people, but you can't flip it where. Well, there was a movie about this. I think it was called Pre-Crime. It had that actor in it.
Minority Report.
The Top Gun actor.
Yeah, Minority Report.
I don't watch movies. I read.
I've got that movie because it's a fucking good one. It's important. It's important for those who don't read. Well, sorry,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
those who don't read to at least see a movie of that caliber. And the Minority Report is the movie, and it's
I've seen
bloody
the
good.
shorts and I got the idea of what it was about. And they're
Okay, cool.
basically arresting people for what's called pre-crime.
Yeah.
So in other words, you thought about it,
Mm,
so we're going to arrest you.
mm. But how
And
they did
actually,
it, like I don't know. Did you read the book or just go
no.
off the thing? Because the movie's fucking good because it goes even deeper than that. Like how they go about, figuring out that you thought you might of a crime, and or
Mm,
well, it was not so much pre-crime. It was actually predicting that a crime would happen by using precogs. So somebody with precognitive abilities is then, predicting the future and
mm,
identifying that this is going to happen in the future and capturing the crime before it happens. But how it was all set up and what happens is even more interesting again. But definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it. Even if you're not a Tom Cruise fan, as I know a lot of people seem to hate him for some reason. Personally, I don't really care too much one way or the other, but it's the substance of the movie and he pulls it off
mhm.
pretty well. But yeah, it's definitely a good one. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
found that the banks, did a similar thing for me, but it was a case of, well, this is the questionnaire. You need to, they said you need to identify yourself. Go online and do that. I'm like, righto, and I go through. Yep, cool. This is me. This is my name. Didn't ask me for my ID. Straight into the questions about where do you earn your money? What's your primary source of income? And I'm like, but it's a multiple choice scenario. It's not a you type in what you do. It's not a I can explain the situation. It's a multiple choice scenario. And I'm like, I can actually see answering these questions in such a vague thing turning against me, even if I'm attempting to do the right thing here.
mm,
This is
mm,
bad.
mm,
One of the questions was, how did you get into your financial position? Well, what I wanted to say was decades of shit government. And that's why I'm broke, but there's no option to do that. So, of course, that's when I went into the bank and made that complaint. And I told the lady
mm,
exactly that. I'm like, you want to ask that question? I'll tell you right fucking now. Shit government. That's why we're all broke.
mm.
Maybe you're not. I guess maybe the bank's looking after you pretty well to come up
Yeah,
with some of the bullshit excuses I've just heard. Yeah,
it's
I
it.
put forth the complaint. They rejected it within several hours. I think I was in there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, something to that effect. 10 o'clock in the morning the next day, they've already rejected the complaint on the street. That was fast, and that's when the writing came.
Mm, mm,
And
mm, mm.
we wrote that interesting response, which was fundamentally bring forth the evidence. If you're accusing me of something, go for it. I have the right to be innocent until proven guilty. Perhaps this was not conveyed properly in the original complaint. I sent it to the lady who originally put the complaint in for me and to the person who rejected it, telling her how I was aggrieved by her desire to dismiss my basic human rights and perhaps that a grievous crime had been committed in the miscommunication of my intent here. I never heard anything from them and they never shut my account down.
Really?
Yep, that was the end of it. That one letter and that's it.
Yeah,
Nothing
yeah,
happened.
yeah. I
Now that
did.
I've
I
done
did a
said this
similar
on the
thing.
podcast, fuck, they might come for me tomorrow, but we'll see what happens. Go
Yeah,
fishing and see what we get.
no, we're both big promoters of fair banking,
Exactly.
which I'm sure all the banks are definitely behind. But,
Of
look,
course they are.
it's funny because they create these scenarios. It's the Hegelian dialect at work: problem, reaction, solution.
Mm,
So, we want to scrutinize everyone and see where they got their money and where it's going and et cetera, et cetera. So they create a problem. And I think it was one of the major four banks actually got fined, like, I don't know, it was like $100 million or something like that, because they were failing their obligation under the act for a fair while. And yeah, they actually got fined for it.
mm,
And that's when they started going at it quite heavily. But
mm.
yeah, it just blows my mind. $1,000, and we've got to ID you.
It's madness. I think we struggled to even pull. I think it was 10,000 out to buy a car. You know,
Mm.
What do you want this money for? To buy a car? You can just transfer the funds. Yeah, but I want cash in my hand when I walk in there and negotiate. This is how much I've got. I'm going to try and not give them all of that. Works a lot better when it's in your hand, you know.
Yeah, they certainly don't understand, do they? And they always try to talk you out of it. And there's always those conversations about what you're doing with the money, and it's like they're little snitches. They're trying to get information out of you a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you know, I don't
None of
need
your
any
business.
financial advice. Thank you very much.
Actually, that was one of the things I said to the bank lady, you know, when she said, oh, we like, you know, we're obligated to ask the question. I'm like, you can ask all you like. I'll tell you what the answer is. No, I don't have to tell you. None of your business.
The banks have all signed up to the agenda.
Or are they the cause of it?
The banks are the agenda. They created it.
That's it.
You know,
Doesn't matter what
who
you vote
issues the
for.
money. What did
Rothschild say?
Nathan Rothschild say? I care not who issues or what was it?
Who rules the country?
Who rules the
Who
country?
rules
Yeah,
or governs, or something to that effect.
who issues? It's who issues the money. Yeah, it's quite interesting because yeah, you've got the International Monetary Fund, and yeah, it's a big club, and you have to have certain qualifications to enter that club to even think about being a bank. You know, you can't just open a bank.
Yeah.
You have to get a license under one of the big four banks. And did you know all the banks in Australia? Did you know that every single loan, credit card, chattel, paper, everything, all of it has been pre-assigned to the Federal Reserve?
Wow.
In the United States, pre-assigned.
There you go.
It's
so we might start. We're at 2 hours, my friend. I think we've given the public the bombshell and a side of salad and chips with this. I might just quickly invite them to ask some questions. So whoever's monitoring out there, can you get your star button ready? We do have a question here from Martin again, who's full of questions today. What's Rod's thoughts at this point in the election?
Well, look, he remains quite vigilant and quite confident. The Google algorithm have shown in the last 4 days that his reach is increased by 69%. I know the video that he put out 4 days ago had 250,000 views. So I'm not sure what he's doing or what we're doing, but it seems to be working. So look, you know, whether that equates to votes and whether that equates to a position in Parliament, only time will tell. But yeah, at this point, Rod's quite confident.
Nice. So he's running for the Senate in WA,
Correct.
I believe.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And that's 3 positions in the Senate, correct? In WA, Rod, Dawn Kelly, and William Newton Wordsworth. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Dawn Kelly. Look, Dawn was actually just in Queensland. She's running in the House of Reps for Hasluck. I was going to try and bring her on because she's an amazing woman, and she's perfect for the role. Perfect, unbelievable, very compassionate person, very intelligent, and the right type of person for the job, the right type of person that will get the job done. So if there's anyone in WA, go and check out Dawn Kelly. Check out dawnkelly.com.au. People will know Dawn Kelly. Yes, it's the same Dawn Kelly from Kelly versus Fiander. So if there'll be a lot of people out there that'll be familiar with that court case. But yeah, it's the same Dawn Kelly one in the same. She's an amazing lady, and if you're over in WA, throw your support her way, because she will not let you down. She's just turning into a powerhouse every day that goes on. So we're hoping for big things for Dawn.
Nice. There you go. We got one here from Joanna. What will be the fallout if there is a big swing away from the major parties?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to say I believe that this year is possibly the year, because 2 elections ago there was about a 15-16% swing towards the minor parties. So the two-party preferred system lost 16% of the vote. Okay. Then in the last election, they lost 17% of the vote. Okay. On top of that, already 16. That's huge. Now, if we get around about the same amount, even 15%, that's close to 50%. And if there's a big swing, it'll be more than 50%. Wow, look at that. That's huge.
There's the graph. Yeah. And that's
That
only going to
is
2019
huge.
at this point. So
Yeah.
if I go back, see if we can find another one.
And the algorithms that we have in the party actually showing similar outcomes.
And, looking at some of this stuff, it's also, it's not just here in Australia. These things are happening, it's, because that's the British one again,
Yeah.
showing.
I don't care who people vote for, but I care who they don't vote for. And you shouldn't vote red or blue.
Yeah. And we've got a lot more good options this time round. Thanks to the Liberal Party, I think, in particular.
Yeah, you're right.
They've created, a lot more sway with libertarians, and now Jared Rennick's created another option for people. Clive's definitely in there, giving it at least another run. I don't know how many he's got left in him. How many more can he afford? Probably a shitload, but it depends on how.
This is the last one. This is the last one. Yep. I'm just privy to some information in respect of that. But yeah, apparently this is his last one.
Rightio. So well, hopefully, people give him enough support. Maybe he'll change his mind, I guess. Is it a case of he threw so much into it last time, it cost him God knows how much, and he only got one candidate into the Senate? Maybe he'll, if more people get behind it this time, will the marketing strategy of changing it to the trumpet of the Patriots work out for him, even though it may not have been intentional due to the fact that he didn't get his paperwork in on time? Will it work for him? Maybe sometimes these things happen for a reason, much like I wasn't planning on doing a podcast today, but the offer was out there. Can somebody fill the slot? And I'm like, oh, look, even if I'm going to talk absolute shit, I'm sure I can come up with something, and look what happened.
Yeah. Well, the world works in mysterious ways.
It certainly does.
Yeah, look, as I said, vote for anyone except for red or blue. That's the best advice I could give anyone.
Definitely.
Anyone except red or blue. And slowly there could be some change.
Well, as I pitched it, I think in a question and answer I had with George Christensen, I was very hopeful in the last election, given that the COVID-19 crap had just happened and people obviously had a foul taste in their mouth at the time. I was hopeful that a lot more people would wake up. Yes, a lot more people did, but not the significant amount I had hoped for. But the question I posed to him was, what do you think it's possible that the Liberal and Labor Party would become a coalition in themselves just to maintain power? and he's just looked at me and gone, well, that would be the ultimate end to this socialist sandwich, wouldn't it? Something to
We
those
know who
effects.
the true players are then as well. It
Mm.
would reveal a lot to the Australian public, and I do believe that's why they couldn't do it, because they are
Yeah.
the same party, and by
Mm.
merging, the fraud would be exposed.
Yeah.
This is the thing with all these acts in regards to the removal of people's fundamental basic rights. They stand by each other. Okay. They support each other, with these tyrannical treaty obligations that they're imposing on people in respect of their property, their freedom of movement, their use of fossil fuels. There's a scam being run against humanity, and if we don't stop it, well, look out. I remember seeing a video of some clerics in the Middle East, and a few years back, and they said, the slavery of the past will be nothing compared to the slavery of the future. And I've never forgotten that. I was like, wow, that is so profound. And it was obvious that that's where it's going. That's where it's going. If people do not exercise eternal vigilance.
Yeah, exactly.
It is the price of freedom.
That's one of those things we need to really sort of bring everybody together in this regard. And I think one of the things that struck me with Senator Rennick's last visit, when he was saying that on his travels around the world and all the different people he's met in various races and whatnot, one thing that really does unite us is our healthy distrust and dislike of our own governments.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And look, I just want to say thank you to everyone for the support and the messages and everything. It really does mean a lot. And whenever you can, reach out to whoever that minor party person is, and just give them a pat on the back, no matter who they are. Okay, because it goes a long way.
Yeah, simple things, particularly when you're exhausted and you're tired and whatever it is you're doing. We all ask ourselves, truth, what am I doing this for? I'm burnt out. I'm fucked. I can barely walk. I can barely get out of bed some days, and just a little compliment can go a long way. It's like, at least there's that.
I was up till 3:30 this morning, dotting my I's and crossing my T's, which I do quite regularly. And there's lots of other things I could be doing, and but this is the thing. These are the things we do. I'm compelled to do it, and as I keep on saying, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and I'm happy to pay that price. It's a small price to pay.
Because you don't want to end up in slavery, that's for sure. And the hope is that we won't be dragged down by those who are not as committed.
Exactly. No,
100%. Robin's got a question here. What does it mean, and why is a vote exhausted?
What does it mean, and why is a vote exhausted? It's an interesting question.
I'm thinking that something perhaps along the lines of a Senate scenario where you don't have to tick every box. So, you've selected your 6 above or 12 below, and it's exhausted once everybody in that has been struck out,
Look,
but I'm just guessing.
A vote is exhausted. I think she's talking at the polls. But usually I believe it goes to preferences. So if that's what you're referring to, I think the Electoral Commission Act's changed, so everything's preferenced. Everything goes to a preference. So, and they can preference things that you don't want it to go to. That's the irony of the legislation now. So, and that changed just before the last election. there was a lot of scrutineers actually out there that were quite vocal, because they were going, hold on, you're preferencing these particular votes to people that are preferenced last on the ballot. So, this is the corrupt system that we're having to live within. It's terrible. What do you got there?
So this is from the AEC at the moment. So this is just their own documentation summary. There were 1 million, and the rest exhausted votes in the 2016 Senate election. So yeah, I think this is basically what I'm saying. Because in the Senate ballot paper you don't number everything unless you want to, and that's where things change. Like, so they say you only have to do 6 above or 12 below, but that's not to say that you have to stop there. If there's more that you'd like to go through, you can add more to it. I believe that's where we're going. Let's continue.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
So this won't happen in your House of Reps sort of thing where you have to number every box. So, if all your other options are exhausted and at the bottom Liberal outdid Labor on your ballot, then your vote goes to Liberal, sort of thing,
Yeah, I believe it's in 2016.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting how they haven't got the last election's details?
It's just the first thing that come up in the search, to be honest. I didn't look that hard because they possibly do. I don't want to say they do or they don't. I just clicked on the first thing that come up, to be honest, just to sort of see what I could find.
Yeah, so it's people who just basically go and throw their vote.
Well, this is interesting. The above the line votes. So, those who are voting for just, you only have to do 6. So, or I would say lazy voting, it'd be another way of putting it, was on the rise up until, this sort of 2007 period here. And then it sort of plateaued and then plummeted. People have started taking a more active role, would be the way I'm looking at this.
In 2013.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
So,
well, the numbers don't lie.
Yeah, it'd be, with a bit more time to dig through some of this and see what we're going to. And I guess at the end of this particular run, it'll be interesting to compare a document like this to what's happened now, some 10 years later, And again, like you said, this is just looking at past statistics and then go and I'm assuming this has continued. And here into 2005, if and you can speculate that it may end up down here somewhere around 2005, which is just a steady drop as the incline. And again, we look at this particular period. Is this a period of complacency? Perhaps. It's not a period that I was voting in, so I can absolve myself of any wrongdoing here. So yeah, interesting stuff. But yeah, that's the way I would, just quickly looking at it. Exhausted ballots, related but distinct concepts in the Senate counts of ballot paper is physical paper. I love the way they just got to explain absolutely everything to just get to the point.
No, but I think there's
there are more exhausted ballots than exhausted. Appendix A. Page 10 provides more detailed discussion. All right, cool. Ballot papers are the physical. Yeah, we've done that bit. The relation between the ballot paper and the vote is transferred. I'm pretty confident that what I've said is correct, but I'm not interested in going through their ridiculous jargon. It's such a simple thing to explain, but they make it so fucking painful. Anyway.
Ooh.
Have you got another bomb to drop right at the last minute, mate?
Yeah, I just got the formal response to the claims that were put to the federal police.
Okay. Are we going to have to save that for another day, or do you need to check if it's okay to?
Yeah, I'd like to read it and probably have a conversation with Rod. He's just sent it through to me. But yeah, I'll if there's anything there, I'll most certainly reach out to you and let you know. If anyone is interested on the Rat FM network tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, Rod will be appearing on the Know Your Rights radio show. And so I'm sure this outcome will probably be spoken about then. Certain information's not for me to provide to people, but yeah. So look, yeah. So tomorrow night, make sure you tune in. There'll probably be a revealing of this response, and hopefully it's a great one.
That's it. So we'll give you time to read that over. We've done 2 hours and 15. I believe we've gotten to all the questions. I'm not seeing the tab up, so we're good. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching, sticking around. We've got a pretty good turnout for tonight, which is really good. And yeah, I don't see that we'll be able to do anything tomorrow because you're obviously busy, and I think our network cafe lockdown is pretty chocolate tomorrow. If I quickly squeeze the calendar, we might be able to squeeze something in. There's a late show. I don't know. I'll have a yarn. If anybody's filled the late show on Wednesday, which is a 9:30 spot. Unless Robin, you're able to give us some insight to that now, since I can see you in the chat. We might be able to have a bit more of a yarn about that perhaps Wednesday if something's going on there. It looks like that's the best available time. Batty, bring Rod into the studio now. I would love to, but that's beyond my powers to conjure up Rod and bring him here right now. It's late. I need to go to bed.
When is it? Sorry, mate.
When is it? Probably Wednesday, maybe. Robin, are you still there? Can you give us is there something else happening on that in that time slot? I'm just looking at the calendar and I see we've got a 9:30 late show that looks like it might need to be filled. I know you do your relentless on 8 to 9 our time. I'm just waiting to see if Robin's going to give us a
Wednesday. What did I commit to on Wednesday? But let me see.
Yeah. Or maybe we can even organize a pre-record or something that we can drop Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday.
Okay. Look, at 9:30 is not outside.
He's trying to get onto the podcast. Maybe it's a wish.
Yeah.
A wish may be granted. No,
I better go.
All right. I'll better leave you to it. All right, my back teeth are floating anyway. So look, ladies and gentlemen, we will keep you posted. Thanks heaps, Darren. I'll let you go and answer that call, man. Much appreciated. So look, thanks, ladies and gentlemen. It is all exciting. Answers are coming back. We will have something for you as soon as possible. At the very least, we'll you can jump on the Know Your Rights show via the Rat FM network. If you're not sure how to do that, allow me to quickly just drum it up because I wasn't expecting this to sort of turn out the way it has today. So that's www.knowyourrightsgroup.com.au. Punching that into the chat here for anybody. Oh, Struth, that's the other one. That's not the one I wanted. What's going on? All right. When in doubt, Control C, because funny how the left click doesn't work sometimes. Weird. Sorry, Constitution Watch is where you can get the information we've talked about so far that I've just punched in inadvertently. Know Your Rights Group will hopefully have some more information for you tomorrow. That's the way to go about that. In that, you'll find there's a radio show tab. It's really easy. I'll show it to you right now. When you go to the website, this is what you're going to see. The welcome radio show. Click on this tab and it explains to you what you need to do. Personally, what I do, I download it on the phone, the Rat FM network on my phone, and then I connect a Bluetooth set of speakers, headphones, whatever works for you, because I find phone audio to be somewhat inadequate. That's going to be your best source of upcoming information, unless something else happens in the meantime. We'll see. I'll drop that into Telegram for those who are unable to receive comments as well. Don't forget, in the description here, we've also got links to how to become a Patreon. We've got links for, the free 7-day trial of the Gaia network, something that I do use myself. If you go through with that link and decide to sign up, I get a kickback. It's a nice way of saying, hey, thanks, buddy. That was really good idea. Fucking love that. And trust me, I didn't enter into a partnership agreement with the intention of making money. I've done it with the intention of, actually, I really like this. I thoroughly enjoy it. After the podcast yesterday, I went and watched some Gaia Network stuff, until my brain fizzed out and I had to go to sleep. I'll probably do the same thing tonight. I love the ancient history shit. It really gives me a good kick. Sometimes I go for the meditation stuff as well, because, sometimes more input, Stephanie, more input is good. Sometimes you reach information overload, and after today's podcast, I think it might be an information overload. So we'll see what happens. Look, stay tuned. There's also, don't forget the Bitcoins. Bitcoin. If you sign up with the link, all you have to do is drop, like, say, $10 in your account. You get $10. I get $10. I think you could probably even drop $5. I'm not sure what the minimum amount is, but Bitcoin's not a bad place to secure some of your funds. It's on a steady rise at the moment. There's lots of different coins, but Bitcoin itself is it's kind of like the gold standard. So that's probably one of the best ways to do things, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not a financial advisor under no circumstance am I telling you what to do. That's just what I do, and if you feel inclined to, hey, give that a go, don't blame me. I'm sorry if it goes foul. So yeah, 10 free Bitcoin on your first deposit, 7-day free trial. Links are in the description. You could also email me, nqfreedomnetwork@protonmail.com, for any of this information that you're unable to acquire, or because you yourself decided to get off your ass and do something and you need help letting the people know what amazing ideas you've just come up with, and you want to share that, you drop me a line and I will do my best to help you out. Who knows? I might be able to do more than just give you a spot on the podcast. I might even have some skills or some contacts that might benefit you in that idea. That's the brilliance of this stuff. We are a community. We work together. We help each other as much as we can. So by all means, if you're having any doubts, if you're looking at the world today and you're thinking somebody should do something about that, somebody could be you. Till next time, ladies and gentlemen, sips.